Alright, welcome back to part 3 of this tutorial series. This is where things are going to start getting really fun, because this is where we start to get into some proper sculpting. This is where we've done with the setup, we've got our base mesh, and now we get to start detailing things and adding eyeballs and mouths and stuff. This is probably my favourite part of this whole process. Couple of little technical things to take care of before we dive in. Actually, first of all, I'm just noticing over here under our scene collection where we set up references before, we want to leave that. But we should just do a quick little cleanup before we go too much further. So I'm going to go and name this because it doesn't have a name yet. Let's call it head. Very original naming, I know. I'm going to take this collection here and call it Geo, short for geometry. And go and put the head inside there. And later on, once we add the rest of the body, we'll add all the bits and pieces in there as well. Again, this is just really good practice to start getting into, particularly once you start working with teams. At the moment, you'll notice that we're under the layout section up here. We've got a whole heap of other different tabs that we can potentially use here. I gotta say, most of the time I do just stick to layout. But I do quite enjoy using the Sculpting tab for actual sculpting. So let's go and jump over to that. You'll see that our scene changes fairly dramatically. Actually, let me just drop back to layout for a second, because there's one major thing that I really like with the Sculpting tab. If we zoom in on our model here, you can sort of see that we get to a certain point. Oh, it's actually not going to do it. Do I have my view set up? Generally speaking, you'll zoom in to a certain point. There you go. We have to zoom in a long way. You can see that it starts clipping here. This is the camera actually starting to intersect with the geometry. Usually what you'd need to do is go in here and just set your clipping plane. I always just go and add an extra 0, and you can see that we get that back. I have to say, usually you can get to about here somewhere, which is, if you were detailing a nose or something. That's where it would start to clip. It's actually not so bad on this model. Maybe this scene's just a little bit smaller than usual. But if we go into sculpting, with the Sculpting tab, I found that you tend not to run into that problem. Like, I can zoom in quite a long way there. You can see here it's changed our material on us. This is now using one of the various matte caps that's available. These matte caps, which you can see there's a whole slew of them down here. These just play with your lighting slightly in the scene. This is just in the scene lighting. This doesn't affect your final render or anything. But it allows you to see the contours and shapes that you're sculpting here just that little bit better. What we've got here, this red material, is really similar to what shows up if you're used to using ZBrush. And honestly, it's not a bad material to sort of start with. It does outline contours and shapes and everything reasonably well. I've actually found that this brown one, this second one along, to be quite good. And in our case, Suzanne is a monkey. She's eventually going to be brown. It does kind of match our color scheme reasonably well. But I mean, you can go through here. I've also found the black one is quite nice. And you can go through and sort of pick the ones that you like. Generally speaking, these kind of shinier ones I don't find good. You've got like a weird chrome metallic emerald thing going on here. That's just awful. This one, if you were doing vehicles or something, it's kind of a car paint. Anyway, there's a whole heap in there that you can sort of play around with. But just for general organic sculpting, I found these ones that are kind of matte and have a high roughness value to be good. So I'm going to stick with this one just because I like it. You also notice that now that we're in sculpting mode, it's opened up this extra menu over here. If we just drop back to layout, you see it disappears. This is a whole bunch of your sculpting tools. They are also in this side panel over here. They're exactly the same menu items, but these ones just kind of put them in a spot that's a little bit easier to find. So this thing is still really low resolution, and there's really not a lot we can do with it. So I'm just going to go and immediately turn on Dino Topo. Press OK. Just as a keyboard shortcut, you can hit Control D, which turns it off, Control D to turn it back on. And that's kind of nice. Now what is it? I think it's, if you just drop down here, you can see we've got our resolution set to 5. I'm just going to go and set it, let's let's pick the eyes here and go, those eyes are already set at a resolution of 8. I actually want to go up just a little bit from there. Let's try 12. We'll see whether that works for us. If you just want the keyboard shortcut, if you can hold down Shift D, you can also change the resolution. You can see that it changes up here. And I find that changes really quickly. So you can hold down Shift once you've got it selected, and you can change it much, much slower. It gives you a lot more control. I'm just going to go and manually set this again to 12. Because we had some issues in the last session with our symmetry, we're just going to double check that symmetry is turned on. And let's just really double check that it's working. Yes, it is. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is to sort of come through here, and you can see we've still got these really quite severe join lines where things are kind of joining. So I'm just going to go through it, and I'm going to just paint with just a clay brush here, and you can see that it reforms the geometry underneath, and it kind of does a bit of a smoothing all at the same time. Now I'm finding that this is still fairly low resolution. I'm just going to try cranking this up. Let's try 15. Let's see whether, yeah, there we go. Okay, I reckon that's roughly about what I want. So I'm just going to go through to all of our joints, just paint them so that it rebuilds the geometry, and then maybe just hold down Shift to smooth it ever so slightly. I'm just going to go through and do this to all of our bits and pieces. Smooth that around the back a little bit. Nice. You can see there's some of these areas that are really, really low poly. I might just sort of paint some of those a little bit and just smooth them slightly, just so we can start to see that we have in fact tidied these areas up already. The ears. Make sure that we get in here, smooth that out. That's much better. Front of that ear is also being done. And just make sure that we've got the muzzle. Just sort of tap on that a little bit and smooth it out. We just smooth those just a little bit too. Building up that nose just a smidge. Okay, so at this point, we've got much better basic shape that we've sort of outlined here, and this is where we really get into the heavy sculpting, and this process can take quite a while. It can take quite a while to go from this really rough mesh that we've got here and turn it into an actual usable sculpted head. Depending on how long you've been doing 3D and depending on exactly what workflow you have, this process can take anywhere from an hour or two to many hours. It depends how long you've been doing it, exactly what your workflow is. Some people are really slow and meticulous and make sure that everything lines up exactly perfectly. I have a little bit more of a free-form flow where I like to just knock out it's close to the right shape. Get things rolling just that little bit quicker, but it does mean that it takes a little bit more time to do detailing later on. Point is, this stage now is going to take a little while. So I'm going to break this tutorial up into two different sort of styles, components, I guess. One is going to be a speed sculpt sort of thing, where I'll play a little bit of music and we'll be able to. I'll speed this up, 2, 5, 10 times speed or whatever it happens to be, so that you can watch this being made in whatever it happens to be, 20 minutes, half an hour or so. And then I'm going to do a slightly different version, which is going to be, I suppose, more. The speed sculpt is going to be for intermediate users who already kind of know how to use the sculpt tools. You already have an idea on geometry and anatomy, etc. And then I'm going to do a live version in real time for the beginners who might just want to hear a little bit more about the process, hear exactly why I'm pulling this particular section or that particular section. We'll talk a little bit about anatomy. And I'll also use it just as a bit of an opportunity to talk about some more general tips and advice like character silhouette, or those ears have really kind of shot into the wrong spot there. Oops, no, we want to stay in solid mode. I'm going to jump into that now. I will add a little clock timer down in one of the, probably down here somewhere. Because one of the things that I hate with speed sculpts is you see this thing sped up to 2, 5, 10, sometimes even more times the speed, and you really start to lose your sense of just how long it's taking the artists to do the thing. I want to make sure that you still get a good idea of just how long this is all taking me to do, so that you don't feel like you're going really, really slowly because you're comparing it to a speed sculpt. So I'm going to set up that timer now, and we're going to make a start. I'm starting to noodle here, which is just kind of going in and then tweaking the tiniest little things. That's usually an indicator that either you don't know your anatomy well enough and you're just not quite sure what you're doing, or it's often time to up-res it to the next level. I'm going to sign off here while I keep noodling, even though I said that I should stop. We'll come back in the next lesson and put this up to a higher resolution and start adding some additional details that way.